Venezuela's spiraling cash crisis has worsened. Anger at the loss of the country's biggest currency note turned into widespread looting and several deaths. Our Arabella Monroe reports.
People are angry at the loss of the country's biggest bill, the 100 Bolivar note, worth just 2 cents. President Nicolas Maduro has extended the period it can stay in circulation, but critics say that's not going to help. The president recently pulled the 100 Bolivar note out of circulation. It accounts for nearly half of all notes and coins in Venezuela. Venezuela's been in recession for 3 years and has one of the highest inflation rates in the world. And people there are suffering, not just from shortages of cash, but also food and medicine. Recent polls have put President Maduro's popularity at an all-time low of less than 20%. But the economic crisis is spiraling much faster.
Italy has approved a $21 billion state bailout for the country's third largest bank, Monte dei Paschi. It comes after the bank failed to attract enough private funding. The money will come from Italy's newly created Bank Rescue Fund. Thousands of Italians have their savings with Monte dei Paschi, which is also the oldest operating bank in the world.
A Wells Fargo bank insider who claims to be a teller has said to us that the bank are training their staff to deal with an imminent emergency scenario. The insider reports, "I am a teller at Wells Fargo here in the United States. This is also my first time using this proxy. They started training us today for a bank holiday. They didn't mention the word bank holiday, but they did train us for an emergency scenario. They told us it's just a drill. I've been working here for 3 years and we have never had a drill like this before. And we've never had any drill. They said that during an emergency, they would close the doors and only allow 3 people at a time inside of the branch. Also, my branch manager said that we would have armed guards during the emergency. The last thing they mentioned is that they won't store a lot of cash in the vault. Bank collapse, an economic collapse, a currency collapse. None of these things would be good. And if the claims are true, it is a dangerous signal to the rest of us to get some money out to tie us over for a month or so in the event everything shuts down. In a banking emergency, credit and debit cards will not work, ATMs will not work, banks will be closed so that you cannot even enter your own safe deposit box. If not, you better get that taken care of.
At its height, just guess what 50 billion Zimbabwean dollars could buy you. The answer? Well, an egg. The simple fact which shows just how impossible hyperinflation was. The peak month came in November 2008. Estimated figures of around 80 billion% inflation. Prices in the capital Harare's shops would change several times a day. There were severe shortages of food, savings became worthless, wages and pensions non-existent. The country printing banknotes of $100 trillion, enough to buy a weekly bus ticket. Hyperinflation became so bad later in 2009 that the country simply stopped printing its currency at all, turning mostly instead to the US dollar or South African rand. Amid the worst of the crisis and disputed elections, a unity government was formed. Gradually, the economic situation has become relatively stable. In 2015, the country phased out its local currency altogether. Zimbabweans able to exchange 175 quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars for the grand total of $5 US.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abugaida. A turning point in Egypt's economy. That's how the country's central bank governor describes a decision to devalue its currency. It's one of the requirements laid out by the IMF in order for Cairo to receive a $12 billion loan. The cash-strapped government has also raised fuel prices and plans to cut back on subsidies for consumer goods. The IMF says allowing the Egyptian pound to trade freely will attract foreign investors. But But for many people, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Inflation and unemployment are already high, and there are fears that the currency devaluation will cause the price of food and services to soar. The UN says more than a quarter of Egypt's population lives below the poverty line. And frustration about the rising cost of living has prompted calls for demonstrations next week to protest against the government's handling of the economy.
My take, the Egyptian pound collapsed. Our economy is based on the money spent by the tourists, the value of the currency they use in our markets. Our economy is not well structured. It is simply because we have a dictatorship, even when it comes to our economy. The military wants to control everything.
Every time we try to purchase any item, the prices go up and everyone says it is the dollar. Look at the dollar value. We cannot pay our bills.
It's very normal in countries around the world to not have subsidized gas. We need to realize this, and Egypt has to start working and developing.
This happened all of a sudden. I drove into the gas station to fill up my tank as usual, and I swear I never expected this. If I'd prepared for it, it would have been okay. But now it's all of a sudden, and things are going to get more expensive. I bet you anything that from this increase in the price of gas, the price of everything else will increase 200 or even 300%.
More than a week after India suddenly banned its largest banknotes, the queues at banks still snake down the street. They're hoping to exchange old notes for replacement currency, but the new money has been slow to reach many. The ban on 500 and 1,000 rupee notes is part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's effort to flush out tax evaders and other criminals who use cash to store ill-gotten gains. But the move has led India's economic life to slow. Technicians still need to manually calibrate tens of thousands of ATMs to the new bills. Sales at some cash-based businesses like mom-and-pop stores and restaurants have come to a standstill. Vegetable traders and farmers who operate on cash have had to let food spoil. Some are slashing prices and offering credit to survive. If the cash crunch continues for much longer, analysts say India's short-term economic growth could suffer. The Indian Prime Minister asked for patience during the transition to a new currency. 500 and 1,000 rupee bills are the largest notes in India, worth about $7.50 and $15. They represent the vast majority of the value of all Indian currency in circulation.
This was supposed to be a good year for India's 260 million farmers. After years of drought, they got rain. But then Prime Minister Narendra Modi took 85% of the country's cash out of circulation in an effort to stamp out corruption. Now time is running out for farmers to plant their winter crops, but they're stuck with empty fields because they have no cash to buy supplies. Experts say that Modi's cash crackdown is hitting rural communities hardest. Reuters' Mayank Bardwaj reports from a farming village on the outskirts of New Delhi. Authorities were supposed to rush new 500 and 2,000 rupee notes into circulation, but that's been delayed. They've also taken some emergency measures to get money from banks to farmers. But experts say it's not much help because there simply aren't many banks in the countryside. Meanwhile, farmers are struggling to get by.
Our lives are a lot harder now that there's less cash in circulation. Not many shops accept card payments, and we have to scramble to find a way of supporting ourselves day to day.
Farmers say they can't afford to wait the season out, planning to plant later when the cash comes in. Experts warn this means that India's key winter wheat harvest is going to take a hit, along with farmers' incomes.
Hey, can I show you something from page 223 of the new Liberal budget in Canada? Just a small mention, half a page. Introducing a bank recapitalization bail-in regime. All right, well, what on earth does that mean? Well, here, I'll read some more. To protect Canadian taxpayers in the unlikely event of a large bank failure, the government is proposing to implement a bail-in regime that would reinforce that bank shareholders and creditors are responsible for the bank's risks, not taxpayers. This would allow authorities to convert eligible long-term debt of a failing systemically important bank into common shares to recapitalize the bank and allow it to remain open and operating. Okay, again, what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means that if a bank starts to go wobbly in Canada and you have money in that bank, the bank can take your money to bail itself out. But that's the joke. See, it already has your money, so they call it a bail-in, not a bailout. That's banker humor. See, when you have your life savings or your kid's college fund or even last week's paycheck in the bank that you need to pay your rent, you are technically a creditor of the bank, as in they owe you that money. But what this Liberal budget item hidden away on page 223 says is that if the bank has trouble, they can just take your cash. Oh, they'll give you shares in their worthless bank instead. Yeah, try paying your rent with that. Now, at first the plan was just to take 10% of people's savings, but then when poor people protesters, they made a change. They wouldn't touch the first 100,000 euros that anyone had in the bank, but above that, the banks would simply seize 30, 40%, just take it. There was such a panic, such a run on the banks, the bank branches simply closed. ATMs were limited to just a few euros a day to people to let them buy food. It was a total meltdown, and none of it subject to warning or a vote or prior notice, let alone approval in an election. It was massive theft to bail out risk-taking bankers, or banksters, as they are sometimes called in cases like these. And that's now coming to Canada, changing the rules so that if a Canadian bank, perhaps the most regulated industry in Canada other than cigarettes, if a bank gets in trouble because millionaire bank vice presidents made risky choices, well, ordinary Canadians will be forced by the Liberals to bail out the banks. They'll just take your money. If the Liberals themselves push the bank into a financial tailspin, do you really think that if a bank was about to fail and it was about to seize its clients' deposits, do you really think that rich, well-connected people wouldn't get their money out fast and first? Do you really think that Liberal insiders wouldn't get wind of this and move their cash while you and me and other poor schlubs were fleeced? Do you think the Royal Bank or TD or CIBC or Scotiabank or BMO should have the power to simply take your money and keep it and say, thanks for becoming a forced shareholder in our insolvent bank? You're such a good sport. You bailed us out of our risky loans. We made the mistake. You pay the price. We'll keep our $1 million banker bonuses and we'll keep your deposits. Thanks for being a chump.